All right, let's go. Welcome to episode 38 of eCom Raw Reality, where we talk all things e-commerce, Facebook ads, Meta ads, Google ads, email marketing, whatever. And if you actually see a cable here, it's because the microphone is almost dead, so ignore the cable. And the main subject of this video is something that might be controversial, but in my opinion, media buyers are dumb. And this is a generalization, so there are a lot of exceptions out there, but I'm actually saying this coming from a background of actually being a media buyer. So I talk from experience here and knowing exactly why I'm saying this. And it's also because of myself, but also what I've seen around. And let me explain this, because by dumb, I mean there's a lack of vision, right? And you can think of other, let's say, jobs out there where people aren't exactly, let's say, the smartest, right? Meaning that they picked a path, and because they are so narrowly focused, it's actually in their detriment. So the main thing with media buying is that you look at data a lot, right? Now, of course, it's all about creatives, creative strategists, and so on. But honestly, even the creative strategists, they have their own gaps. But let's look at media buyers in particular, because media buying, more or less, as a skill, means looking at data and making the correlation between data and results, performance. So that's why I'm not a big fan actually of having media buying, let's say, friends or online connections, just because of, I guess, to some extent how they think. And that's basically me a few years ago when I was starting more or less and just doing a lot of media buying myself, right? And not understanding all the other things that are outside the account, right? So there are a couple of things we can go through here, but first of all, I would say the main reason why I'm saying that media buyers are dumb is because they focus too much on numbers. And that's an issue, especially if you've ever worked with a media buyer, or basically if you own an agency or an e-commerce brand and have collaborated with a media buyer. The thing is that sometimes, because they are so narrowly focused, they miss so many other things, right? It's just like with designers sometimes, but for example, the main reason why we don't see that with designers, this drawback that I'll tell you about in a second, is that they don't have so much of an impact on the business, right? Meaning that designers are important, right? Like any role out there, everything is important. However, the main problem is the following: designers don't decide if a business kind of dies or has success, right? While on the other end, media buyers kind of do that, because they decide if they will spend $100, $1K, $10K, $100K on a campaign, right? And this is where you actually have way too much freedom. And another downside to all of this freedom is that you look at the numbers, right? You look at how much you spend, the ROAS, and sometimes you forget actually there's an MER. You forget there are returning customers. You forget that there's stock to think of. And this was actually me around 3 years ago. That's when I believe almost 3 years ago. That's exactly when I left 2 brands out of stock, because I was doing a good job in terms of media buying. I was really doing a good job, and I just sold too much for those guys. So they were out of stock and they couldn't sell for the entire month of December anymore, because I basically pushed budgets too much. And that's another drawback here. I didn't ask them, how much stock do you actually have? And I didn't ask them, can I spend 5 times more? The main question around that time was, if we have good performance, we can scale, right? But then we see that there's no more stock because like we spent too much, we had too many sales, we had too much volume, even if efficiency was there. So profit was like life changing. I still remember one of the reviews from back then, right? And besides that, the problem that media buyers sometimes are way too narrowly focused. So what you need to do, what's the solution here? Well, you need to understand more. Like you need time and experience to understand more parts of the business. You need to have more conversations with the business owner, with probably not suppliers, but still having a sheet with what's the stock that you have, how much you should ideally sell, what would be the efficiency that that brand needs, and maybe they don't even know. That's where you can also help, right? And I mean, yeah, this doesn't necessarily fall into a media buyer's role specifically, but if you're a media buyer and spend a lot of money and don't know all of those things, I mean, you're doing a disservice for yourself, I would say, because you basically don't really add more value, even though you know you could. Because I mean, if you would listen to a video like this, you already know that, all right, there's a little bit more to learn, right? And even myself, I'm humble enough to know that there's always more to learn, even though that's one of the issues here. Let's go to like the third or fourth issue with media buyers. The fact that it goes to their head because they have good results. And I'm aware, for example, that yeah, it was me who decided to push during that time. It was me who made all of those sales, but there would be no me if there was no founder there with an idea, with a product, with a website, with a web designer, with an agency, with so many components, right? With communication skills, with a supplier. I could list for a few minutes here different things, small things or bigger things, right? So this is one issue, that you start to believe that all of those numbers are normal, that you're that good. And yeah, you might be good, but you still have to work with something. Meaning that, for example, if you are the best software engineer but you are born in Africa, you won't have the same opportunities, the same amount of money, the same amount of projects, the quality of projects that you'd have in the US, for example, right? So let's look at this disparity. And that's why it's really important to understand that, especially for media buying, because you are so close to the sale, meaning that you are the one who is spending, you are the one sometimes who is deciding if you spend more or you spend less. And this actually puts more responsibility on your shoulders. And if you're not actually ready to have more responsibility, then you'll basically fuck it up. Because more or less, if you are not paying attention daily, and I made some other episodes talking about that, because like that's one of my core skills actually, media buying, and more so like actual data analysis and understanding all of the components. And I still have way more components to learn about, but the thing is that in most cases with almost any role, you do need to learn more and more, right? For example, if you're an appointment setter, yeah, you have, let's say, a base, but then you need to add a few other skills, such as understanding a specific niche, or psychology, communication, words, so many other things that will decide if you make $100, $500, $1,000, $2,000, $10,000, right? And here I'm actually also talking in terms of value, because sometimes like you have a role, you're being paid, and you bring almost no value, meaning that that's why all of a sudden Google could get rid of all of those people they have in their company, because they're not really useful. It's like, yeah, we had some money, we hired a few people, but yeah, they didn't really help. This doesn't really happen in eCom or with media buyers, because like almost all smaller companies like need every role that they have. But especially the media buying role, this is really important. Sometimes it's being I would say even like disrespected, because media buying has become easier, let's say, to some extent because of the creative and so on. But the fact is that a well-rounded media buyer should have some creative strategy, let's say, knowledge as well, right? While, for example, a creative strategist, they won't really be a media buyer, meaning that you can kind of try to have both, a little bit of both. But the thing is that, for example, I'm not near close to anyone who is like a creative strategist as their main role, because that's a totally different part. It's more of a right brain type of thinking versus left brain, right? Logical versus creativity and so on. And ideally we do have both, and we actually have both, but it depends how much we spend in each one. Like this is the main thing. We have limited time, and if you are thinking more logically all the time, you might be missing some of the creative part. And if you are way too creative, and this is what I see with creative strategists, yeah, they can churn out creatives, but the thing is that sometimes you don't actually need more creatives, or like trying to find something new, because sometimes you have all of the pieces that you need already, and then it's actually the job of the media buyer, the mastermind, the growth strategist, whatever role you want to give here, to actually like look at the business and understand, all right, what do we do with these creatives, and do we actually need so many creatives? Because I think there's like some creative porn right now with Meta, but I mean, it might be just me because I'm thinking of 80-20, right? I know that sometimes when you test, a lot of it is just like wasted ad spend, and it's done because like someone needs a creative role, right? And at the same time, that's why you can actually be more specific, because if you have data, if you are a media buyer and look at data, you can pretty much see which angle sometimes works, especially if you have an ad account with a bunch of data. You can pretty much see if one thing worked or not, and then you can lean more on that one. So this was like one of the, I guess, longer videos, especially in terms of like me talking because I could talk for hours on this subject. But the main reason is exactly because of that. I feel like media buyers have some traits which just make it hard for them to either be likable or even think long term, because that's one of the main issues. If you're a media buyer, you know that pretty much it's like sometimes you get good results and you're amazing or feel amazing, and sometimes you get bad results and you don't feel good, even though it's not necessarily your fault. And this is where it's really important to look at the market, what's happening around, if basically it's more of a downtime, if it's seasonality and all of this, because there are always reasons why you won't be making as much money in January as in November, right? Or basically in a random month of, let's say, April, like right now, you won't be making more than on December, January, November in most cases, just because like unless you just have more clients, you know, or you just haven't scaled until like this month. But that's the only thing I can actually think of. So that's pretty much it for this one. If you have anything you want to share, you can do it. I'm actually like friendly, you know, so even though I say that media buyers are dumb, I think it's just because sometimes I feel like it's not exactly the right mindset to have when just focusing on media buying and sometimes believing that you're either the best or the worst, right? And media buying should be more like designing, right? It's not like you'll always fluctuate between like being the man who, or woman who, or whatever gender, who makes the business successful, or you're the bust. And sometimes I feel like there's too much pressure on media buyers. So should be more balanced here as well in terms of expectations. So with all of that being said, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed it, you can leave a like. You can look around the library here if you want to see other episodes. And until next time, peace out.